What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here, live from a hurricane down here in Florida. If you haven't heard, big ass storm down here in Florida. It's actually pretty loud outside right now, so I had to turn down the volume on my mic to make sure it's not picking up a bunch of background noise. But hey, we still have power, at least for right now. Fingers crossed. It can bring you guys this live stream as we do every single week. One of my favorite times of the week, going through what to expect for this weekend's golf slate, and of course, the excitement, just like the day before Christmas, to go out there and try and take down a GPP. So we'll touch on the weather, some of the strategy involved for this weekend, and then go through the player poll and all of your live questions to give you an idea of who I'll be playing. And of course, maybe some of the guys that you're trying to decide between. So feel free to go ahead, leave any comments that you have down in chat. And of course, hopefully you're having a great start to your Wednesday evening. So let's get this thing rocking. We're going to do this in as concise a format as humanly possible. And we'll start as we typically do here with a look at the golf course. So in 2021, the Sanderson Farms Championship, Country Club of Jackson, played pretty much how we've seen it over the last 4 to 5 years. It's one of the easiest venues around all of the PGA Tour, though it's a little bit lengthy, a little bit over 7,400 yards. Sorry, for a par 72. It's not very difficult. All the par fives are reachable in 2 by anybody that's even slightly longer than tour average. And then some of the par 3s are less than 170 yards. You have 2 drivable par 4s on the docket too. There's plenty of birdie opportunities to go around. And off the tee, not much a penalty to be had at all. Just a few wooded areas, a couple scattered, water hazards on a few par 3s. They are on play on a few par 5s as well, but not really off the tee. So you're not dealing with any difficult tee shots. You can pretty much hit driver on every single hole, get away with it. And even if you're kind of spraying it off the tee, shoot something like 5 to 6 under par. So as a result, scoring average is better than 2 under par, 2.1 shots under. The fairway percentage isn't very high. That a lot of that is because of people just wailing away at driver. You still have relatively wide fairways that are 30 yards wide, but the green and regulation percentage, so despite a lot of people not being in the short stuff, is still well above tour average. In fact, 5.2% higher than what we see week to week. They're at 73.4%. So in general, it's an easy golf course from tee to green, where you can miss the fairway, still get away with it. And then on the greens themselves, it's even more simplistic. You're dealing with some of the flattest greens. They don't have very much undulation to them. So guys like a Sergio Garcia, who's notoriously poor on the greens, particularly with his green reading ability, has had success, gained over 6 strokes here en route to his victory, literally with his eyes closed. And I try to make this as I try to put as much emphasis on that as humanly possible, because if someone can win this event with their eyes closed putting, truly, that should tell you a lot about it. The greens here are like your local muni. You're going to have 3-4 inches of break at the very most for a 10 to 15 footer. And when you give even a horrible dog shit putter like Sergio Garcia 10 to 15 footers all day that are just going to hardly move in one direction or the other, he's going to make 5 or 6 of them. And that's what you see a lot of the field do. So when we look at a lot of the key stats, I'm mostly looking at approach, which you'd expect, right? That's the most consistent stat for week to week on tour, but also a lot of Bermuda putting. We're looking for guys that are specialists on these grainy greens, because at Country Club of Jackson is a champion Bermuda, which tends to be even more grainy than what you see here on tour. Moving on a little bit further, let's talk through the weather here. So here for Thursday and Friday, we've got some interesting ad choices on the screen, I have to say that. But let's talk through this. So on Thursday, you're dealing with relatively flat weather in the morning. Really high wind gusts. It's actually kind of surprising, right? 23 mile an hour wind gusts at 8 a.m. is something that we're not used to seeing. By the PM, it actually calms down a little bit, but the sustained winds are still there throughout the entire slate. Albeit the wind gusts are actually about good 5, maybe even 7 to 8 miles an hour lower. So you could argue that it should be a little bit easier to play in the PM wave there. And then for Friday, you also have slightly lower winds. Now, this has only come to my attention over the last 2 hours. So I've been checking this religiously for the last 24 to 48 hours, and it's been flat here for Thursday and flat here for Friday pretty much the entire time. And for tomorrow, you're looking at what, like a 4 mile an hour difference between the two waves. But if you're talking about a 4 mile an hour difference on the PM being advantageous the first day, and then on PM another 4 mile an hour difference, I feel like that's going to be like a half a stroke to a 0.7 stroke difference, or at least at advantage there. So I'm slightly looking at the PM AM wave as an advantage, but I don't think it's going to be a stroke and a half sort of advantage. I think it's going to be like half a stroke at at the very most. And what I really want to emphasize here is that it's changed about 100 times over the last 24 hours. Do not be surprised if when you wake up tomorrow morning, if you're going to get up before lock, maybe 7 a.m. Eastern time, if it's even different then. So I would be prepared to really change your strategy on the fly here, particularly for Showdown on Friday, where I don't count on this forecast whatsoever. And even for Showdown tomorrow, I would probably wake up, because if you're still getting a lot of these gusty winds in the morning, whereas it's calming down a little bit in the afternoon, you might want to take some of the PM guys in Showdown, whereas a lot of the time we're trying to get those guys going off early and for first round leader too, right? So if you're betting in that market, a lot of times we're looking for those guys going off first. It might come out of the PM wave, which doesn't happen all that often, but when you're going to have a reverse split like this, it's definitely something to keep in mind. So that's something that I'm keeping an eye on. As of right now, like I mentioned, I'm slightly favoring the PM AM stack, but what I'm really doing here is I'm taking 10% of my lineups. So I'm playing 150 max, 15 of my lineups, I'm going with the 6-0 of the AM stack, 15 lineups I'm forcing in as a 6-0 of the PM stack. And then I may add or subtract 5 to 10 lineups in either direction, probably towards the PM AM stack advantage, just because I think that's the one that's more likely to come into play. But as we always know with these weathermen, they get things wrong a lot more than they're right. So just don't count on it all too much. Expect to see a lot of volatility. If I was going to look at this and say that there's an advantage as of right now, I think it's PM AM. Again, lower wind gusts there on Thursday, and then Friday morning, slightly lower winds, both from sustained and the wind gust perspective on Friday. So it's very fine margins when it comes to looking at some of this weather there, but something worth investing in, particularly if you're entering 150 lineups. That sort of edge over 2 to 3 lineups might not be that drastic week to week, but if you're playing with a large enough sample size, you will see those effects, particularly if it's a half a stroke to stroke advantage. Let's move over to the player pool now, see what's going on. So let's clear my screen here. Let's go. There we go. There's the Sanderson Farms player pool there. And this time I did black out most of the player pool. So last time, guys, I obviously had all of the projections on there. I told you it's not going to happen every single time. But all of the players that I've talked about in a video this week are going to be on here, including their ownership. So, Sam Burns, I mentioned that he was going to be mega chalk this week. I wanted to include his ownership here so we could revisit him just to talk about it now that we know his ownership and that sort of thing. I've considered doing it week to week. Typically, I want to put a lot of it behind the paywall because the people paying deserve to get a lot of value out of that. But something I also want to bring to the table is, I mentioned Sam Burns, right? A lot of the play isn't just dependent on, how he models for a course, how I expect him to play, his perceived win equity, all that sort of fun stuff. It's also about his ownership, right? It's weighing all of those positives versus, how much you have to invest into him. So I think it's important to talk about. So let's go through it. Up top, you have a clear piece of chalk here, and then relatively flat ownership otherwise. And that piece of chalk is Sam Burns. And I think he is probably the best piece of chalk worth eating that we've seen for quite some time. And if you've been eating chalk over the last, 4 months on the PGA Tour, you've probably made a ton of money playing DFS. And now, I'm somebody that doesn't love chalk. I was able to eat it over there at the President's Cup. It treated me extremely well. I did so at the Fortinet, a few other tournaments at the end of year, like the Tour Championship. I cut my losses, just took the best plays in the field, and it really paid off for me. I had a pretty solid end to the year. And going into this 2022-2023 season, it seems like a lot of people are coming along to that, realizing that a lot of the best plays now are starting to come through because our community as a whole is doing a lot more research and they're getting sharper. And people, they'll use the same strategy over and over again, like they're banging their head against a wall and not realize that the meta changes. From the time that I started playing PGA DFS, like religiously playing every single week, breaking down golf courses, all that sort of fun stuff about 2.5 years ago, I've already seen about 4 metas come and go over a 2.5 year span, right? And this is just the latest iteration of a meta out there. And what I'm seeing right now is that you're going to have to eat some chalk. In the past, you could get away with pretty much avoiding anybody above, I'd say 18%. That was kind of like my magic number. If you were above 18% ownership, I had a really hard time about playing you. In fact, there were guys that I thought were slam dunk plays that I used to fade just at 19% ownership just because they were over my quote unquote magic number. You can't play like that anymore. Guys like Sam Burns legitimately have like a 40% chance of finishing in the top 15 here. And a lot of win equity too. You're talking about, he's 11-1 here, but that's implying right around like an 8.5 to 9% chance of winning, a little bit higher than 9% chance of winning, actually. If he's going to win 1 in 10 times, if he's going to finish in the top 5, let's say a quarter of the time, top 10, we'll just put the top 10 a quarter of the time, right? We'll be a little bit more conservative about it. I mean, if you look at his outright odds, they're giving him a lot more respect than that when it comes to what you're getting for a top 5, all that. You have to bet quite a bit on that to get any sort of value on a Sam Burns. You got to I don't want to say you have to lock in that sort of value, but I'm playing to get leverage on him. I'm playing Sam Burns aggressively this week. He's 30% owned. I'm not getting a true 2.5x value here. So I'm not playing him in 85% of my lineups, or sorry, 75% of my lineups like that would imply. I'm going a little bit more conservative when it comes to my leverage this week, but I'm still getting him in a vast majority of my lineups. The only time I really play somebody in this aggressive of a fashion is when I see him just being so much better than the rest of the field. And that's really the case with Sam Burns here. The last time I did it was with Jon Rahm at the Mexico Open. I really thought that he was just the best play, bar none, in that field. He went out there and won that week. And the time I did it before that was back at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. That was, I don't know, like 2.5 years ago. He went out there, won at Detroit Golf Club. It was with Matthew Wolff back then. I don't do it very often because these sort of situations don't happen very often, right? And most of the time, I play the guy that's the clear favorite at these events. And I don't know if it's people just conveniently forgetting about all of these situations. Most of the time, these guys smash. Like a majority of the time, they at least finish in the top 5, top 10. And a lot of the times, at least, from my memory, when I've played them, like a Jon Rahm winning, Bryson DeChambeau going out there and winning, they actually win the golf tournament in these sort of events. So I wouldn't put it past Sam Burns, who's last year's champion. He made every single putt humanly imaginable at the President's Cup. I almost would argue that 30% ownership is too low on Sam Burns, right? Like 30% week to week, if we were just ignoring the rest of the field, if this was a major championship level field, I mean, it doesn't matter who it is, right? 30% would be too much. This isn't a major championship sort of field. This is arguably like a Korn Ferry Tour field, right? Like your second best player is Sahith Theegala, right? Like we have to temper our expectations here a little bit. And what I'm thinking is that you got to play him in like half your lineups, right? So if you're going to try and get, let's say, a little bit more conservative with your leverage, play him in half of your lineups, right? You don't have to go out there and play him in all of your lineups, but you should try to get significant leverage on him and take him in half of your lineups. Now, if you're trying to take him where I'm taking him, it's closer to like 60%, right? I'm going 2x the field. I'm trying to at least double up there. That's kind of like the golden rule for leverage, right? Is you want to get at least 2x the field. Personally, I'm trying to be more towards the conservative side, right? So closer to 2x than 2.5x. But that's my take on Sam Burns. I'm not going to bore you all day telling you to play the best player on the slate, but I figured I'd give you my 2 cents on the guy up top. These next 3 options in the 10K range, so Sahith Theegala, JT Poston, and Russell Henley, are all going to be pretty much the same level of ownership. You're looking at 15 to 20% on all 3 players, and arguably similar level of players. And the one thing I'll say is that one putter stands above the rest when it comes to his putting on Bermuda, and that would be Russell Henley. So if I had to choose one that's my favorite out of the 3, it would undoubtedly be Russell. Also long-term, he's the one with the most sustained success. But Sahith Theegala had a great performance here last year. JT Poston loves Bermuda too, has a great split on the surface, just hasn't played here or had as much success as some of the other guys in the 8 and 9K range that we can get to, who we'll talk about here in a second. But JT Poston, intriguing. I'll say that. Same thing with Sahith Theegala. But if you're going extremely heavy on somebody like a Sam Burns, it's hard to play all these guys, right? Maybe of the 3 players that I have blacked out here, you might be able to play one additional player on top of the Sam Burns. Whereas, if this was somebody that was 18, 19% owned, we might be able to take 3 of the players here above $10,000, right? But because we're investing a solid 65% of your lineups into a Sam Burns like I am this week, it's just not as feasible to get to that sort of leverage. Moving into the 9K range, we're going to talk about almost every single player here. I mean, in my content, right, I really peppered the 9K range, whether it was from the fades perspective or going for guys that I really like this week. Denny McCarthy has to be a fade. His ball striking numbers have been atrocious for at least a month now, if not a couple months. In fact, over his last 50 measured rounds, he's just a slight gainer on approach. So that's going to be a stay away for me. He's also in the AM wave, so has that working against him. Same thing with Scott Stallings. If that's not a reason why I faded these players, that's just complete coincidence. Again, that whole weather report where you're seeing that the PM AM might be advantageous has developed in the last 2 hours, right? They're on Windfinder. So keep that in mind. But Scott Stallings playing in the AM wave, I don't love the fact that he lost over 12 strokes on approach at the Tour Championship. I mean, that is beyond concerning. And sure, it's a one event sample size, but it's also such an outlier that you know something had to be drastically wrong. And he's had time off to fix it. At $9,500, 18.5% projected ownership, it's not like you're getting an ownership discount on him. So I'll also be fading him alongside Denny McCarthy. I'm getting plenty of leverage on Taylor Montgomery. So because I'm completely fading McCarthy and Scott Stallings, I have plenty of ownership to go around in this range to invest 35, 40% of my lineups into Taylor Montgomery. And sure, last week, the way that he went out there and performed is completely unsustainable. There's going to be people this week that fade Taylor Montgomery saying that he can't go out there and gain 11 strokes putting again. Completely agree with you there, right? But I don't think that means that you have to fade him because that's not Taylor Montgomery's game. Taylor Montgomery is an elite level ball striker. More often than not, he's going to go into an event and gain a bunch from tee to green, right? He's long off the tee. He's a pretty damn solid approach player. I'd say at this point, I don't really know how good of an approach player he is. We're going to have to see on the PGA Tour how some of his metrics come out, but I'm assuming it's going to be pretty elite level stuff from Taylor. So that's his avenue for success. And if he's going to ride that momentum from last week and even just gain, 5 strokes putting on the week, I mean, that could win the event. Like, he doesn't have to gain 11 strokes putting. So the whole argument that this is unsustainable, he can't keep it up sort of thing, that would be an argument if it was Brendan Todd, right? And Brendan Todd went out there and gained 12 strokes putting this week. That, he's a great putter, right? So he's going to have to rely on that putter. He's just not going to gain 12 strokes in that category. The fact of the matter is, even if he gains half the strokes that he did last week on the greens, he probably finishes the top 5 or wins this event. That's how good of a ball striker he is from tee to green. So Taylor Montgomery is chalk, but again, kind of like a Sam Burns, I think is chalk worth eating. Again, just look at the chalk report from the last, I don't know, 2-3 months at this point. And I'm not talking about guys that were chalk and you shouldn't have played. Just the highest owned player on every slate for the last 2 to 3 months has smashed. Is absolutely murdered out there. So just, I don't know. The whole fading chalk thing, I can take these guys up top, right? So even if I take Sam Burns and Taylor Montgomery together, I have plenty of guys down here in the 7 and 6K range that are going to be 1.5% owned that I can take and pair with them that makes their ownership non-existent, right? If I'm taking 2 guys that are going to be 1.5 or less owned in both of those slots, I mean, that's enough to make me unique right there, right? Let alone if I'm going out there trying to go for more of a unique build, that sort of thing. There's a lot of things that we can do down low. So just the whole chalk thing, as I'm kind of getting tired of it, it seems like the meta is coming around to it too. There's plays that are just a lot better than the rest. We have to pick our spots to fade, right? There's a reason why we're fading Denny McCarthy. There's a reason why we're going out there and fading somebody like a Scott Stallings, Emiliano Grillo, that we'll talk about here in a second. I can't think of a reason to fade Sam Burns, other than he's coming off the President's Cup. He probably had a few too many beers. But do you really think that Sam Burns from Louisiana, a country boy, can't take a couple beers? I mean, get real. Us boys down here in the South are built a little bit different, okay? We can wake up the next morning at 7 a.m., get to work after going out there on a bender. So just understand that with Sam Burns. I don't think it's nearly on the same level as him, quote unquote, recovering from all of these things. I mean, JT, Max Homa, right? Lightweights. They were talking about it there on Twitter. Didn't hear a peep from Sam Burns. I feel like he's pretty good out there. Also with Taylor Montgomery, he's a little bit of more of a prospective sort of thing right here. But if I'm right about how good Taylor Montgomery is, I mean, he probably will be a 10K golfer in this sort of field going forward. It might be like a Sam Burns in terms of his ownership. He might not be as good as somebody like Sam Burns, but might be pretty damn close. Might be head and shoulders better than somebody like a Theegala. At least that's what I think. I think he's a better player than Theegala long term. And obviously, if I think that, and he's $1,000 less expensive and pretty much the same level of ownership, I'm going to want to play Taylor Montgomery over Theegala all day, right? So that's my perspective on it. I think that he's just the better player. And hey, if you don't agree with that, that's fine, right? It's early in his career to make those sort of statements, but that's what I personally believe. Let's move on a little bit further. Keegan Bradley at $9,400. I still love him as a core pick, particularly because he's relatively low owned. He's $9,400 teeing off in the AM wave, which I don't love. Again, as I mentioned, if I want a stack, I want it to be the PM AM stack, but still, I think he's more than viable here. He needs to get the putter working. We know that, but over the last 50 measured rounds, I do have to say that the putter has been a bright spot. It's actually a slight gainer, and that's over a 50 round sample size, right? So we're not talking about, I don't know, cherry picking 4 to 5 events where somebody like Keegan goes out there and is able to gain with the putter because he has 2 good events over those 5 event stretch. It's like Keegan Bradley for the last 3 to 4 months has been absolutely consistent with the putter. So you love to see that with Keegan. Also relatively low owned. Grillo is maybe the most strange case of shots gained metrics that I've seen for quite some time. He's losing with the sorry, I almost had it backwards, right? This is how weird the situation is. He's losing with the approach play, which historically he's one of the best approach players on tour. And that's not hyperbole. I mean, he was up there in terms of shots gained approach per round with guys like Morikawa, Tiger Woods when he was playing 2-3 years ago. I mean, Grillo, even as a young player, was posting insanely solid shots gained approach stats, just could not buy a putt for his life. In fact, was like by far the worst putter his rookie season on the PGA Tour. Now is gaining with the putter and can't gain with the approach play. It's just so backwards. I can't even begin to explain it to you. The only guy I can think of that kind of went in that same direction was Jordan Spieth, and it's kind of stuck for Spieth. So I don't want to say that it's completely impossible for Grillo to have molded into a completely different player, but that doesn't excite me about him. It doesn't make me think that he's going to go out there and be consistent by any means. In fact, if you look at his recent form here, you'll see exactly why people, if you've been fading him of late, have pretty much gone away with it, right? 25th, 19th, 31st. He's been in a pretty expensive range for the Fortinet. Also at the St. Jude and 3M Open, he was relatively expensive. The only time it would have paid off over his last 4 events was at the 3M Open when he was really expensive, right? So that'd be the one argument to get to him here. But he's just not that guy. He's not somebody that we can count on to go out there and gain 5 strokes putting every single round, because I've seen too many rounds of him go out there and have the yips. Like, it's like scar tissue after a while. Like, you've seen Corey Connors putt enough to know that no matter how well he hits the ball, he's not going to make 5 or 6 birdies unless he gets that putter working. Emiliano Grillo is that same sort of dude. He will miss 5 to 8 footers all day if he does not have that flat stick working. So $9,200, nearly 20% owned. It'd be something if he was single digit owned, but even with some of the lackluster results, right, like 20th, 30th place finishes, he's still getting quite a bit of attention there. So he's going to be a fade. I do like Davis Riley, though. I do have to say, I'm a sucker for Davis. So he's one of the players I feel like I have to preface with that now, because every time I play Davis Riley, it goes horribly. And then the next week I get him at low ownership or a low price like he is here. It's not low owned this week, but he is a low price there at $9,000, a lot cheaper than he probably should be. I'm going to have to buy in on him. I'm a sucker for Davis Riley. So I'm just going to leave the argument there. But the kid has undoubtable, I mean, just, it's so obvious the upside that he brings to the table. You can see it in his shots gain metrics. He'll go out there, he'll gain like 6 strokes approach one week. He'll go out there in the next gain 9 strokes putting. He's more than capable of gaining 5+ strokes in any one shots gained category. I'd say probably except for around the green. Not the best around the green player on tour. I can definitely give him that, but somebody who can go out there and gain in bunches in the other 3 categories. He's going to put together 2 of those 3 categories in some week, and that's probably going to be enough to at least get into contention, if not win an event. So I like that for Davis. He's at least low enough owned where I could take him in 35 to 40% of my lineups and get the kind of leverage that I'm looking for. Talked about Sepp Straka this morning, so I don't want to talk about him too much here, but Sepp Straka gained a bunch of strokes on approach over his last 2 events. That's really what I'm looking at for Sepp Straka. Otherwise, he's been complete dog shit, right? So he's overpriced, but that's also why he's being completely overlooked. But if he has those breadcrumbs with the approach numbers, we've seen him win before. He's a really good putter on Bermuda, not the best putter on the other surfaces out there on tour. I think there's enough hope there for Sepp Straka to warrant getting to him at low ownership. Now, again, there's better plays here. I'd much rather play Davis Riley for $100 more, right? But he's not nearly, he's actually more than twice as owned. Somebody like a Sepp Straka. Dietrich's twice as owned as Straka, also probably a better player too. Had been more consistent, also pretty much the same level of ownership. So we'll talk about Hadman here in a second. but all of the other guys here are going to be higher owned, and it's for good reason, right? Sepp Straka, extremely inconsistent. But if we can get Straka to hit out here, get us to that, let's say 5 to 10th percentile sort of performance, we're going to be in the captain's seat because he could legitimately be 5-6% owned if he comes in a little bit lower than I expect here. And even if he comes in right at 8.4%, that's clearly the lowest owned player in this range. The only other player that comes close is an Adam Hadwin. And then outside of that, Christian Bezainhout's also relatively low owned. I almost talked him up as a sleeper pick going into this week. Everyone else is like 14, 15, if not 20 to 30% owned. So, when you can get yourself somebody that's going to be 8% owned on a slate as flat as this when it comes to ownership, he becomes even more attractive, becomes even more of has even more utility as a play here in a large GPP sort of format. Thomas Dietrich, I'm okay with. Adam Hadman, I like a little bit more because he's going to be relatively low owned. Now, he doesn't bring a lot of flashy stats to the table. He's not an immaculate course fit. He really doesn't have anything going for him where you'd be like, wow, I want to play Adam Hadwin now, right? Any reason to really talk to your friends? Like, there's not really a reason to talk him up, right? That's the fact of the matter. Like, he's just average at everything. But he's also a better player than most of the guys around him. He's also by far the most consistent player in this range. So if you're in a cash contest, a single entry 2 to 3 max kind of contest, Adam Hadwin has a lot of utility in those formats. I mean, his top 20 equity is a lot higher than anybody else in this range. And in those smaller field contests, I'm not going to say that that's always enough, right? You're going to have to hit a top 5 or a win with your top 2 players there. But he's a really good filler spot to kind of move you along in that line. So I don't hate Adam Hadwin. In large field GPPs, I'm a little bit less excited about him than I am for some of the smaller field contests. But I know everybody out there isn't playing a large field GPP, isn't playing 150 lineups. So I always like mentioning some of the, more smaller field 2 to 3 max sort of plays that some of you out there might be playing. Give me a second here. Got a little bit of Coke here. So obviously we got the hurricane going on. I got to be alert, make sure that nothing's going on. So no whiskey for tonight or anything like that. But hey, we're still enjoying ourselves. We built some laps before we got on stream here. Afterwards, a little bit of tinkering to do. So hopefully everyone out there is having a solid day and we can build some winning lineups together. But let's get this moving. So a few other core picks that we can talk about here. I do like Taylor Moore, still do like Seamus Power, particularly because both of them are relatively low owned. I have 11.7% on Moore, which is actually a lot higher than I thought it'd be. In my core picks video, I know I mentioned that he might be right around like 10 or even single digit owned when it comes Thursday, but I have him at right around 12%. Maybe it's the Gsluke bump. Maybe it's people looking at his track record to end last season and seeing exactly what I saw that drew me to the Taylor Moore play. But either way, I'm still willing to get leverage there. And if Seamus Power is going to be 10.7% owned, you're kidding me. I mean, I have to get leverage there. That's just a spot that I'm not going to be able to avoid. $8,400. Absolutely love what I'm seeing out there when it comes to just his upside. And if I was power ranking this field, this is the whole reason I got the Seamus Power. Okay. I went and I power ranked this field by just full season form, right? So I just looked at everyone's full season stats, looked at their course fit for Country Club of Jackson, and my number one player was Sam Burns, as expected, and he was like by far my number one, which was glaring enough. But number 2, and then it was a relatively wide gap until number 3, which was Sahith Theegala, was Seamus Power. Seamus Power, because of his birdie or better percentage, his consistent putting. I mean, even over the last 24 rounds where he's been a little bit hairy when it comes to his stats, he's still been okay with the flat stick. You can see gaining a little bit there, 0.09 shots per round. And over his last 50 measured rounds, he's gaining over a quarter of a stroke per round putting. So he's been able to retain that despite lackluster performances elsewhere. But because 2/3 of his season was, I don't know, top 20 player on tour, he was up there in the top 20 of the FedEx Cup rankings for quite some time without a win, which is something that's really hard to accomplish on the PGA Tour. That says a lot about his pedigree long term. So I know he's been in a little bit of a rut. He's had about a month off at this point to try and get past it. I think this is a spot to buy low on Seamus Power, right? If you're getting a 10K golfer for $8,400 and he's also 10% owned, it's kind of the double whammy there. Some of that you want to take advantage of. I don't know if my comments are shut off, by the way. I've been trying to figure that out. There's a notification on my stream here that says something about comments being turned off. So if you can't comment down below, I'm sorry. I have no idea what's going on. I'm going to double check that here again. So give me 1 second here, boys. We'll get back at the player poll here in a second. Let's see. Yeah, bro. So on my screen, guys, I brought it up on my screen. I can see all the comments down in chat. None of them are coming up on my end here on the stream. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look off them on my phone. I really apologize for that. Normally, I'm able to bring them up on screen and whatnot, but let's see what's going on. We have Swim McThunder down there. What's going on? And CJ. Nick says, glad to see you're safe, Luke. Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah, we're doing well right now. It's actually not that windy outside. I can tell because it's usually howling out there. So maybe we're in a little bit of a calm turn here. So that's good for the stream. The weather gods decided to give us a little bit of a breather there. So Make Thunder says, I might go 100% burns if you only play 20 entries. I would. If I only had 20 entries, I'd be 100% burns. I'm playing 150, so I don't have to be quite as aggressive there. But yeah, 100% agree with you there, boss. Chad says, any thoughts on Justin Suh? Your brain is telling you to play him and put him in some lineups. If you're looking for leverage, I think this is the week to get to him. He looked atrocious there at the Fortnite, but from everything I've heard about Justin Suh is that he's a high pedigree player, somebody who all the Corn Ferry Tour specialists were telling us about going into this year. It's a really good buy low spot. Now, there's guys that like a little bit more around him. So unless you're also not, if you really like the players around him too, it might be hard to get to him. But if you aren't enthralled with the guys around him like I am, then by all means, right? He makes a lot of sense there and he's going to be relatively low owned. So I could see it. Jack says, here are the three that you have for in each way this week. Straka at 50-1. Okay. Suh at 66-1. So you're going along that same train there too. And then you have Robbie Shelton there. So Shelton's the only player there I'm not on. I love Straka. I love Justin Suh. I understand it though. He had a great end to his Corn Ferry Tour season. That's good to see. And he said, for a first round leader, what do you think about Ryan Moore at 125-1? Do you think he has any chance? So I want to look at his wave. If he's PM wave, that might actually be a good thing. So I do want to take a look at that. He's relatively cheap. Let me bring him up here. Don't remember his price or his wave off the top of my head. There he is. Okay, so he's AM wave. He's $6,600. I mean, I'm okay playing the guys in the AM still. They'll still have receptive greens. So even if they are in more blustery conditions, a little bit higher wind gusts, maybe it isn't the end of the world. I don't know. Ryan Moore does some crazy stuff, man. He's a volatile player, so I don't want to tell you that it's crazy that it can't happen. I wouldn't count on him going out there and being first round leader, but you're getting it at 125-1, right? There's obviously a little bit of an expectation there that it's probably not going to hit, but is it possible? Absolutely. So I'm not going to talk you off of that. I think it makes sense. Antonio says, what's up, Luke? Thoughts on Burns being tired? He played a lot during the President's Cup. Do you think he can flop? Anyone can flop when it comes to PGA DFS. But if Sam Burns, somebody in his mid-20s is going to be tired after playing golf for 5 days straight, then he's got a lot bigger problems in life, right? He's in his 20s. He should be at an age where that's not really a problem to him at all. I think it's fine. I mean, I go out there, I play multiple rounds of golf in a day. It's not as tiresome as you think. And at the President's Cup, because they're playing so often, it's not like he was hitting balls on the range all day, right? Like after his round, I'm sure he wasn't out there grinding for an hour or two after his round. So no, I think he's all right, man. Can he flop? Yes. I don't think it's going to be because of fatigue, though. If he flops, it's just the volatility of golf, right? Guys that are absolute smashes that go to golf courses that fit their game perfectly. They can be in form. They can check every box on the planet. Golf is a bitch sometimes. It's sometimes the best players flop. I mean, Tiger Woods, right? This is the cut at major championships from time to time, right? Shit's going to happen. That doesn't happen all that often sometimes. So yes, it can happen, Antonio, but I wouldn't say that it's because of fatigue. Sway says, I feel like Stallings might be more overlooked. That -12 shots gained approach at the Tour Championship might have an effect. It has an effect on me. I have to be quite honest, man. I see that from a player and I see somebody that's broken. It's hard not to think about that, right? Particularly when he's overpriced and a little bit chalky. Yeah, I'm fading him. I have to say that, Sway. I do think that it's something to keep an eye on, but it's a single event sample size, right? So there's the counter argument there that no, it's just one event, right? You can shake it off, go out there and turn it around. You are still paying a premium for him in terms of price and ownership, though. So that would be my counter to that counter there. Nick says, can you give me your thoughts on Nasty Nate? Okay. And Old Man Sink. Yeah, we'll get to them here in the 7K range. I actually wanted to talk about both of those. And Fantasy says Brendan Steele, the man who's effed every lineup you've included him in. Yeah, I'm playing him this week, so I'm probably going to be there with you too. For me, that player, I mean, there's a few of them, right? So first off, Davis Riley, right? I talked about me being a sucker for playing Davis Riley. I've had a similar experience with rostering Davis over his first season. Let's see, there's got to be a few others. I mean, there's Adam Svensson. I always seem to get the short end of the stick when I'm playing Adam Svensson here on tour. Everyone has those players. So I'll just say, don't feel too bad about yourself. There's definitely, it seems like everybody has their kryptonite out there. And for me, there's definitely more than a few. Mark says, you've left Davis Riley out this week, so that enhances his chances. Like I said, right? It's a fickle game. We play this game called PGA DFS, and I think everyone gets the point here. Everyone's been here long enough to understand that humor there, right? So yeah, definitely agree. That's funny. Space says Moore is first out. Okay, so that helps his case. And Antonio says, what's your betting card looking like? Okay, that'll be the last question I touch on before we hop back into the player pool here. So my betting card this week has 4 players on it. I did not bet Sam Burns. 11-1 just doesn't get me moving in terms of an outright bet. I don't know. It's not going to excite me if I bet $200 to win $2,200 on Sam Burns. Just, I don't know, personal preference, right? Rather play him in DFS. I decided to bet Taylor Montgomery. I really think that he's a much better player than people realize. Like, I think that Taylor Montgomery is going to be like, I don't want to say a superstar. I'm like the king of these takes, okay? Anytime, I don't want to say anytime I like mentioned that I think someone's just going to be like insanely good, it ends up being true. But I said it about Davis last year at the Fortinet. He actually missed the cut that week. I said it about Cameron Young last year at the Fortinet. He missed the cut that week. So obviously for the week that I say it, it doesn't really help the player. But long term, obviously they've been pretty damn solid. But I also said that Sam Burns was going to be a world killer before his 3 wins last season, right? I was like, this is the year of Sam Burns. This is where he's going to take himself to that next level. And he's pretty much gone there. A year later at this point, right? I said it before this week, actually. I picked him to win this event last year. So not surprised that I think he's going to win again this year, right? Going for the back-to-back there. And I have to say, I did the same thing at Valspar. Thought he was going to win 2 years ago. I said he was going to win last year too, and it happened there too. He's done it before. Like, there's a reason why I'm okay taking Sam Burns again this week. But Taylor Montgomery, I'm getting those same sort of vibes. I also said it about Cam Smith. If you guys remember, I can bring up the clip. I'll do it next week, actually, because I want to bring it up on the stream. I was like, Cam Smith, going to be your best player in the world here by the end of the year. And I literally said that after Kapalua when he won that event. And now he's arguably the best player in the world, right? You can, world rankings aside, what is he, like number 2 at this point? He was within 2 or 3 world rankings points of upsetting Scotty Scheffler and getting that number 1 seat. I don't think anybody thinks that Scotty Scheffler is better than Cam Smith. Like, I think pretty much everybody will say that Cam Smith's probably the best player in the world at this point. So I was right there, but Taylor Montgomery is like the next guy I'm willing to say that about. I legitimately think that Taylor Montgomery is probably going to be like a top 20 player in the world by the end of the year. I don't think that's hyperbole there, and probably wins his first tour event this year. I guess that'll be my hot take on Taylor Montgomery. I don't think it has to be this week because, again, the guy I said this about last year was Cameron Young, right? He missed the cut at the Fortinet that week. So I'm not saying it's necessarily going to happen at this event. But by the end of the year, I really do think that guy is going to go off. So I do have Taylor Montgomery on the betting card. I bet 4 units on him. I went a little bit overboard there. Bet Davis Riley. I should say I'm down to 3 now. I had 4 bets on the week. I bet Sebastian Munoz when it first dropped, but obviously that ended up getting not withdrawn, refunded to me. And then I bet Austin Smotherman. I got a really, really good number on Smotherman the first day it dropped, 125-1. So those are the 3 bets that I'm with right now, right? I had 4 bets. One of them got refunded to me, but I'm sticking with them. Usually a lot of the value that I like to target is there early on a Monday. And by the time we get here on a Wednesday, a lot of that value is washed away, in my opinion. So I'm not forcing anything else in. Let's move on to the 7K range, though. So we talked about these 8K golfers. For the most part, we talked about, Taylor Moore, Seamus Power, 2 guys I'm using as a core play. Harris English, it's a wild card. The guy is still returning to form at this point, so I'm not sure you can get to him reliably, but he's a solid piece of leverage. Trey Mullinax is striping the heck out of the ball. I do like what I'm seeing from the ball striking perspective. But Gary Woodland kind of combines everything that I'm looking for, right? Off the tee, long off the tee, a course where you don't have to worry about your accuracy. You love that for Gary Woodland. The guy can definitely get the yips to go. He can move it right to left, get that little duck hook moving. He also has a slice in his repertoire. So when he gets that double miss working, Gary Woodland, you got to watch out. But at the Sanderson Farms, it's like one of 5, 6 courses on the PGA Tour where you can get away with that sort of thing. So I do like that at $8,100. But I also like the ownership, right? So it's not just course fit, the fact that he fits this sort of venue. He's also single digit owned. So you got to like that. Brendan Steele's kind of similar, right? He's $7,900. Now, I thought he might be a little bit higher owned, but people, I mean, obviously, someone down in chat kind of hit the nail on the head, right? People are getting annoyed with playing Brendan Steele. They're playing him, they're looking at these ball striking numbers, and he's not coming through for people. And I haven't really played a lot of Brendan Steele. I've been avoiding him. I've talked him up as a fade quite often. And look at this missed cut. Hardly, no, actually, there was no cut at the BMW. Right? It's a 32nd place finish, really isn't shit. Missed cut, 30th at the Rocket Mortgage, missed cut. Yet he's still gaining all of these strokes at the ball striking. So clearly, even when he's going out there and ball striking the shit out of it, it doesn't really mean all that much. He hasn't done all that much with it. But imagine he lives in La La Land, right? Everyone's living in La La Land when they're talking about Brendan Steele. Oh, but what if he goes out there and he's a neutral putter? Oh, but what if he goes out there, he gains 3 or 4 strokes to the field? The crazy thing with Brendan Steele is that he does that every once in a while, right? So it's not as much of a what if. It's fair to say that about Luke List, right? Anyone that says like, oh, Luke List is going to gain a bunch of strokes putting this week is lying to themselves. The best that he's going to do is maybe gain a stroke or 2 putting to the green. And that's going to be at something like a POA, right out there at Torrey Pines where he won last year. Not on a Bermuda golf course. He's dog shit on Bermuda. Whereas a guy like Brendan Steele has popped multiple times on his career on the Bermuda grass surface. Same thing with Keegan Bradley. And that's the reason why I'm getting to Keegan Bradley this week. There's at least a little bit of hope for Brendan Steele. And I'm fully expecting him to go out there, lose like a stroke per round, the putting like he's done over his last 24 rounds, which come to think about it, right? His last 6 golf tournaments, assuming that he made all the cuts, which he hasn't, we know that over his last few events, he's losing a stroke in every single round. So he's lost 24 strokes over that period. Just it's kind of whopping to think about. Like think about all the red that you're seeing there on his record. Just not what you're looking for from Brendan Steele. So that's definitely something that's concerning. But at the top of the 7K range, I love Aaron Rai. He played particularly well on the DP World Tour. Justin Suh, we talked about. I think he's got some upside. Love Brendan Todd, though, coming in with the approach stats that I'm looking for, which might be a little bit surprising. We know that the putting is going to be there. He's one of the best Bermuda putters in the world. But coming into this event, he's gaining a bunch of strokes not on the greens, going into the greens, right? Hitting his approach shots. So you'll love to see that with Brendan Todd. Alex Smalley is a lot higher owned than I thought he'd be. So I have him at 10% owned right now. I thought he might be like 7.5%, 8%. So it's a little bit glaring that he's up there in the double digits, but it's because he's a much better player than all of his peers, right? You know, when you compare him to a Nick Hardy at that same price tag, Alex Smalley is not twice the player as somebody like a Nick Hardy, but from the long-term perspective, you know, I expect Smalley to be a regular on the PGA Tour for probably the next few decades, whereas Nick Hardy's probably going to like have his card a few years, you know, lose his card for maybe a year or two, get back on the PGA Tour. I see him as a little bit more of a journeyman. So, you know, no offense to the Nick Hardy camp out there, particularly if any of you are watching. Alex Smalley is just a generational sort of talent that probably going to win sooner rather than later. Kind of similar like a Taylor Montgomery. He's probably going to win this year and solidify his status here on tour. I mean, he finished in second at Corrales, which, by the way, if you remember my comp courses going into this week, Corrales was my number 1 comp course. That's even more reason to like Alex Smalley this week. Adam Svensson, still love him, even at 9.2%. He's always a little bit chalky, but you got to love the fact that he's got the high birdie or better percentage. He's, I mean, just a great ball striker. I mean, that's really the whole reason to get to both of these guys, right? Alex Smalley, right? Gains off the tee and on approach. Go down here to Svensson, right? Gains off the tee and on approach. And both of them have been pretty decent with the putter. Now, more consistently, it's been Svensson, right? Gaining close to a third of a stroke per round. But even Alex Smalley, right? Still gaining with the flat stick, albeit a little bit less extreme, but still gaining there. That type of skill set, you know, pretty much anything but around the green this week is how you get to that ceiling sort of performance. So I like that from both of those players. They're definitely still in the pool. Kevin Streelman being overlooked. I agree. Somebody mentioned that a little bit earlier in chat when I was going through it. So definitely agree there. I think that he's a pretty solid pick. You have Hubbard, who no one's really talked up this week, but I always expect Hubbard to get a little bit of ownership. It seems like people love playing Mark Hubbard, and I'm definitely one of those people too. I play him a lot more often than I probably should. But in a weak field event, he always has a knack for going out there and finishing in the top 10, top 20. So, you know, a top 10, top 20 at $7,400 is probably close to optimal in a lot of these GPPs. So you got to love that. Definitely getting there. Luke List, might just have to pull a Sergio Garcia here, right? So anytime we have these really dog shit putters, like a Luke List, like a Sergio Garcia, I mean, there's not even that many on tour to really talk about that are just hemorrhaging strokes on the greens. I mean, Kyle Stanley comes to mind. Emiliano Grillo typically is one of those putters that I'd group into that sort of scenario there. These kind of putters I only play at specific golf courses where they can get to that ceiling performance because the course kind of dictates that that's possible. Look at the winner last year. Sam Burns lost 2 strokes putting right over the 4 rounds there. That should give Luke List fans and his camp just a ton of hope to go out there this week and go out there and have some success. So I do like Luke List. Hopefully he's not losing 8 strokes putting to the field in round 1 like he did about a month ago. If you remember that, he literally lost 8 strokes putting in a single round 1 of an event, and then came back, made the cut there, and had a pretty decent weekend. So Luke List is an absolute crazy man. We'll go out there, gain a bunch of strokes, tee to green, pretty much every single round. It's all going to come down to the flat stick, though. Will Gordon is an interesting case study. He's one of the Korn Ferry Tour graduates that we've actually seen on tour before. Almost got his special exemption, kind of like a Tom Kim did on the PGA Tour back when he was playing out there, nearly won the Travelers Championship about 2.5 years ago. He got a bunch of starts to end that season after the Travelers and did nothing with it. He missed like every cut. He was dog shit. And I feel like everyone, that's all they remember about Will Gordon is like, oh, he finished second place at the Travelers. This kid's a stud. And then forget that he missed the cut like every single week after that. Now, am I playing Will Gordon this week? Yes. I'm hoping that he's a better player now, right? He had a whole season to go down there, work on his game. He was a lot more successful on the Korn Ferry Tour than he was his first iteration there. So maybe he is a better player. He looked like it there at the Fortinet. So I'm kind of going behind that momentum, hoping that he can carry that form into yet another start. And some of the guys here on the Korn Ferry Tour, you're not going to see them coming. But when you start to see form, as particularly if they could do it not only at the Fortinet, but also this week at the Sanderson Farms, there might be something there, right? Some of these guys that are in the 6 and 7K range might just be above average PGA Tour golfers that are going to be like top of the 7K range or 8K golfers going forward. So, keep that in mind. You might want to ride some of that momentum. Definitely doing so with Will Gordon. That's the case there. Moving into the bottom of the 7K range here, I don't want to spend all that much time on these cheap options, but Davis Thompson, another young Korn Ferry Tour guy that I think probably worth a few looks. SH Kim, so Sung Yeon Kim, he's pretty much, as I've been told, is the Korean version of Cam Smith. Just unbelievable putting ability, makes everything. And the putting stats that we got from the Fortinet Championship completely back it up, right? The guy was making everything 30 to 40 footers for days. It was tilting if you didn't have him in DFS like I didn't have him at the Fortinet. I'm going to have to be on board here. If he's going to be the Korean Cam Smith, then I'm going to have to play him, right? Because I think the world of Cam Smith. Steven Yeager at $7,200. Love what I see there. He was a value pick going into the week, still there at 8.7% ownership. Austin Eckroat, another Korn Ferry Tour stud I want to talk about here. He's playing in the PM wave, which is at least what I expect to be the slightly advantageous of the 2 waves there. But the reason why I like Eckroat is he's a high birdie percentage player. On the Korn Ferry Tour, a little bit volatile, had a bunch of top-end performances, also quite a few missed cuts on tour, and he definitely has trunk-slamming outcomes where you can go out there, shoot like +5 to +10, be an absolute killer in your lineups, but he also has that top 5 to top 10 upside. So you got to love that with Eckroat. Like him there at $7,100. Neesmith, like his upside too. I think he's just a better player than many of his peers. Patrick Rogers, like him too at $7,100. He's a volatile player that relies on the putting, but this is a putting contest, as good old John Rahm would call it. So I will be playing him. Let's talk about Old Man Sink. There's also another player I promised to talk about here with Nick. So I'll make sure to cover on that too. But let's touch on Old Man Sink. $7,100 playing in the morning wave. He's a little bit overpriced, right? So like the guys around him, I don't think he brings as much upside to the table, but he's also going to be a lot lower owned than his peers, right? So his ownership reflects the overpriced nature of what he is. And it's not like he's overpriced drastically. I mean, he should probably be like $6,900, like $6,800 maybe. He's $200, $300 too expensive. If that's going to make him a third of the owned as where he probably should be, yeah, it's a good flyer play, right? Stick him in 5 to 7% of your lineups and run with it. 10% if you're feeling a little bit frisky, and get some leverage there. So yeah, I think it's an okay play, Nick. It's not my favorite play, but I definitely understand it. He's a solid source of low-owned leverage, right? So if you're trying to take Sam Burns and Montgomery together, which knowing you, Nick, you're probably not doing that, right? You're not going to play two 20+% players together. I know it's kind of not your MO there. But if you wanted to, right, taking somebody like a Stuart Sink would almost, I don't want to say that would alone make you unique, but making sure that you just don't take complete chalk with your other 3 spots, you're probably unique taking him in your lineup. So I like Stuart Sink. Who was the other one? Let me bring it up here on the, I had to bring it up on YouTube again. Sorry, boys. The whole chat being broken thing is definitely a little bit annoying. And nasty Nate Lashley. So Nate Lashley, I think, is a little bit cheaper. Go ahead and just, there it is, $6,600. Nate Lashley is not coming with form. So when you mentioned him to me earlier, actually over there on Discord, I did a little bit of a deep dive on him. I wasn't a fan of the ball striking stats. He's been a little bit all over the place. He hasn't played very often. From what I can understand, he had a toe injury where he had to withdraw. I think it was from the Rocket Mortgage Classic. Actually, let me check on this. $6,600 recent form. Let's see. Nasty Nate Lashley. So I think it might have been, it was before that actually. So it's not even on here. He withdrew from an event before the Open Championship, missed the cut at the 3M Open, hardly made the cut at the Rocket Mortgage, which is an event that he's won before, and then hardly made the cut at the Fortinet. So he's kind of just sputtering right now. I mean, I don't think he's the worst play in human history, right? Like he's like 1% owned, Nate Lashley. He's kind of similar to a Stuart Sink. I'd rather play Sink than Lashley, but you're getting an even lower owned player in Nate Lashley. He's only $6,600. And really, you're choosing between him and like what, a Ryan Armour? Like, sure, that's fine with me, right? Going with Nate Lashley. You're choosing between him and what, like a Patton Kizzire, an MJ Daffy. You're choosing between him and Matthias Schwab, Harry Hall. Like, they all suck, right? Like, even the guys that I'm playing down here, I'm playing all those guys I just mentioned, by the way. They all suck. Like, they're not good tour players, right? So, like, just because Nate Lashley isn't a good player this week from a talent perspective doesn't mean that he's not a good play from the GPP perspective, right? Because he has that top end volatility in him. So nasty like Nate Lashley is a nasty looking pick. But yes, it makes sense. Like you can definitely get to it and feel pretty comfortable. It's one of those weeks. It's a weak ass field, right? So you got to be willing to play some of these guys that just on the surface don't look like very good plays because you're going to see so many of them this week. It's going to be annoying, right? After the first round, the leaderboard is going to be, at least if what happens every single year here happens here tomorrow, it's going to be an ugly ass leaderboard where you're going to go, oh, who's that guy, right? Particularly if you're not somebody that follows the Korn Ferry Tour, it's probably going to be one of those weeks. Just prepare yourself if you're not already mentally prepared for that. Let's catch up on chat, just so I don't get too far behind on it. See what's going on and see where we are. Is Davis Thompson a decent play to make the cut? Oh boy. Nick, I don't know if you asked that question on purpose because that's a really tough question. Is Davis Thompson, sorry, and that wasn't even Nick. What am I saying? I'm completely reading that wrong. It's a really small screen. Forgive me there. Anson says, is Davis Thompson a decent play to make the cut? Not Davis Riley. So I misread two things there. First off, I need his odds. So I know what kind of odds, I need to know what kind of odds you're betting. If you're talking about from the GPP perspective, right? So in DFS, whether he's going to make the cut gets you to a 6 of 6. I think he's got a decent chance compared to his peers, right? If I had to pick somebody cheaper than $7,300 to make the cut, he's probably the first guy I'd pick. So yes, I think he's a pretty good shot to go out there and make the cut. But if you're asking me to evaluate it based on like an odds standpoint, I do have to know what odds you're getting. So I don't know if you're talking about for GPPs or from the, again, odds betting perspective, but go ahead and let me know. Let's see what we've got. In a sense, his thoughts on JT this week. Yeah, you're talking about the real JT, right? JT Poston, my boy. Love him. He's a absolute class act out there on the PGA Tour. What's going on, Isaiah, by the way? Hopefully you're doing well there. He's the class of the field, right? He's $10,200. So nothing I can say bad about him. I think him and Sahith Theegala are great young up-and-coming stars that are getting attention that they probably have deserved for quite some time. But if you're talking about like betting on him and all that kind of stuff, he's probably being a little bit overrated, right? Because he's the number 3 player in the field. I love myself JT Poston, but in this sort of field, anybody can win. Like it's a crapshoot. So I love JT Poston this week. I think he's a solid play, but it's one of those weeks, Isaiah, where like one of these random dudes like a Matthew Neesmith, I don't know, like a Mackenzie Hughes, something like that, is going to end up winning. It's just going to be some random. It's unfortunate, but that's the kind of week that this is. This kind of golf course that this is, to be honest. Let's see what else we've got. Eric says, where are the weather issues? At the beginning of the stream. So if you go to the beginning there, I talk through that. There's going to be a slight advantage, at least as of right now, to the guys that are going off in the PM wave. But make sure to check that out on your own too on Windfinder. Nick says, Brian Stewart, first round leader, of course. Now you're just saying things to mess with me, Nick. Antonio says, is this the ugliest tourney based on names that you've ever seen? Yes, it is. I've seen a couple swing season events that come close to this, but the Sanderson Farms normally has a few decent names in it. Like, it's not always this atrocious of a field. One of the main reasons why is you have the President's Cup the week before, which last year it was the Ryder Cup the week before the Sanderson Farm. So it had a similar effect. A lot of those top end players don't show up there. It's also a weaker field, so they don't show up for that reason. But then you also have the Live Tour, right? So now you have the Live Tour going on. A lot of those players that would have been in this sort of field aren't going to be here anymore. I think it has to do with that. Yes, it is. It's kind of unfortunate, but that's the ecosystem that we're in now. Antonio says Stallings is plus 205 to miss the cut. Thoughts? I would bet on it. He's a volatile player. He's either going to miss the cut or be in contention. So I think plus 205 is actually pretty good odds on him to miss the cut. And thoughts on Brandon Wu, who I'd like this week. Brandon Wu, good Bermuda grass putter. So for the sample size that we have, he's a significant gainer. Played decent golf to end last season. I think he's a good sleeper pick there. So going off in the AM, which I don't love, but he's $7,000. You could do a whole lot worse. I like him a little bit more than Stuart Sink. So if you were choosing between those two players, I would slightly prefer Brandon Wu to Stuart Sink because they're both relatively low owned, but both pretty decent options that I'm both going to be playing this week, right? So let's move on into the 6K range now. Like Hayden Buckley, like Lee Hodges, Buckley was pretty solid at this event last year, if memory serves me correctly. So let's look at that. Hayden Buckley course history. Where are you at, buddy? There you are. 4th place last year, finished in the top 5. I believe parlayed that into a solid 2 to 3 week stretch. Also, towards the end of last season, was able to go out there and string together a few decent performances as well. So I think he's worth a few looks. Lee Hodges, also pretty decent end to last season too. So the ball striking numbers were starting to get there. Love Callum Turan though. So in the PM wave, which you'd love to see. Same thing with Chesson Hadley. A lot of the picks I took, like coincidentally, are in the wave that I'm looking for. So that was obviously not on purpose, as the tee times came out after the content went live. But you love to see that there. But Callum Turan, love the ball striking stats that we've been seeing from him for quite some time. So just to give you an idea here, if you didn't watch the value picks video, which what are you doing, right? If you haven't seen that, but gaining a bunch of strokes off the tee and on approach and with the putter, which you love to see. Carl Wan, I think you can't sleep on. I think you have to consider playing him. He's long off the tee. For the Korn Ferry Tour, he was like the best player on that tour. He was number 1 on the points list for quite some time, especially at the beginning of the year. He earned his tour card before anyone else did, Carl Wan. $6,900. I'm definitely going to have him. Peter Malnati is a decent play. He loves the Sanderson Farms. In fact, if you take a look at his course history, it's among the best at anyone at this course. Made the cut last year, 2nd place, 45th. So he's made the cut in 4 out of his last 5 starts, including a 2nd place finish, which you love to see. You have Smotherman, who I love this week. I always play Smotherman, so it's kind of like a Davis Riley. It would be weird if I wasn't playing Austin Smotherman. Hadley, though, you got to love that he's only 3.6% owned. I thought he might be closer to like 5 to 7%, so that's actually a number that you love to see. Joel Damon, high birdie percentage player. I love playing him in weak field events. MJ Daffy did not work last week, but I'm baking my head against the wall one more time. I'm being a little bit stubborn, going right back to the well there, because I think he's a better player than people are giving him credit for. Like Adam Long, but he's dealing with injury concerns. So if you're in a 2 to 3 max, don't play Adam Long. But if you're in a large field GPP, maybe you eat some of that volatility, some of that risk, and hope that he goes out there and has a pop week. Patton Kizzire is going to have like 1 good week a year. You just hope that you're on it at the right time. Harry Hall's a much better player than I think people understand. So I'm going to be on him as early and often as possible. Matthias Schwab, I mean, he made the FedEx Cup playoffs last year. So that says a lot about his pedigree. So you have to at least consider him down here. Ryan Armour, one of the highest birdie percentage players of all the PGA Tour. So a player that I'm considering just because this is a birdie fest. And anytime you're at a course that's, surrendering under a 69 average for a par 72. You have to consider all of the birdie makers. Sam Ryder had a good end to his year, made a few cuts in the FedEx Cup playoffs. So you love to see that from Ryder. An aggressive player that loves holing out. So maybe he gets an extra hole out or two this week. That'd be great. Just anytime you have Sam Ryder and you get that hole out eagle, it's just it's a beautiful thing to see. Because at his price tag, he makes a cut. That's going to get close to the optimal lineup. So you love to see that. Chad Ramey, I think that he's got a little bit more upside than his peers. I mean, he won last year at Corrales, which was it Corrales? Yeah, I think it was Corrales. He won an event last year. I know that. Right, now I gotta know. Now I gotta look it up. Where did Chad Ramey win? It was Corrales, right? Let's see. Yeah, he won Corrales. Okay, good. My memory was serving me correctly. It would have been weird if I was wrong there. I'm usually pretty right about that stuff. Yeah, Chad Ramey won at Corrales last year, which was my #1 comp course. So yes, I think he's worth a few looks too. Harrison Endicott played excellent at the Fortinet Championship. So a player, if you're looking to ride some form, may want to consider playing. Scott Piercy played particularly well towards the end of the year. So I think at $6,400, he's clearly a little bit mispriced. Harry Higgs, I always have a soft spot for a big rig. So yeah, I'll have him in a few lineups just for shits and gigs this week. Let's see. And that's pretty much it. I mean, everyone else down low, if I was going to consider anybody, God, it's such a shitty play. I'd play Garrick Higgo, though. Garrick Higgo won his first ever start on tour. Actually, sorry, his technically second ever start on the PGA Tour, and he was $9K for it. When he first came over from the Euro Tour, they were like, you know what? The Palmetto Championship, you're going to be $9,000. And you know what he did? He went out there and won. You know what he's done since then? Jack diddly shit. I believe his best performance is like a top 10, and it was on the DP World Tour. Wasn't even over here on the stateside. He's just a good player that we know can get on a roll and win a golf tournament out of nowhere. I mean, we saw over there on the DP World Tour. So I'm only interested in playing Garrick Higgo off of long layoffs when he hasn't played for a long time. And it's going to seem so backwards. I love the fact that we haven't seen him play in God knows how long at this point, right? So that's the thought process with Higgo. It's probably not that sound of a thought process, but my thought process is that he's had time to maybe figure out the swing. He's a high pedigree, extremely talented player out of South Africa, and you could do worse things, right? You play him in 5% of your lineups, he misses the cut. Oh, well, right? You're going to have to take shots on guys down here at the bottom every once in a while. And of the guys down here, I think that he's the guy that I'm the most comfortable getting to. What we'll do now is hop over to DraftKings. I'm going to share my screen. We'll talk through a few lineups, and then we're going to wrap it up with a few prize picks props that I have my eye on. But let's go ahead and talk through the strategy first. So what we'll do here is we'll talk through a large field GPP lineup. So assuming that we're entering a 10 to 100,000 entry contest and really have to worry about ownership, because we want to win first place, and not only win first place, but also win it with a unique lineup so that we're not splitting it with 5 to 20 of our best friends like you might have for a showdown slate for football from time to time. Let's try and be a little bit more unique here. So I want to show you how you be unique by going through a Taylor Montgomery and a Sam Burns. So taking two of the chalkiest plays on the slate, you can still get unique. I promise you. I'm going to show you how to do it right now. Going into the 6K range, you just have to find a few, let's call them diamonds in the rough, right? And I love MJ Daffy this week, but he's also still getting ownership. He's still going to be like 6-7% owned. So I don't know if he's this quote unquote diamond in the rough that we're looking for. Whereas Harry Hall is going to be like 1.52% owned. So he could be one of those sort of players. Let's go ahead and take one more of these, just really low, high leverage players that we can get to here. Brandon Wu. Let's go ahead and take Brandon Wu. I think he's a really good example of one of those players that's going to be like 2, maybe 2.5% owned at the very most. By taking a Harry Hall and a Brandon Wu, this almost makes our lineup unique by default, right? It's not like we have to go out there and force it now. So when we go into the 8K range, we can take guys that maybe aren't chalky, but are still getting a fair amount of ownership, like a Gary Woodland, right? 8% owned. That's still decent for this sort of lineup. We have $8,000 remaining. Let's go ahead and take $7,900 Brendan Steele, right? Only leaving $100 left on the table. You're taking 8% owned Woodland, 8%, 1.5 owned Harry Hall, something around there, like 2-3% on Brandon Wu. You can still take two of the chalkiest plays on the slate. This sort of lineup is more than likely going to be unique. Right? I don't even think it's going to be close, right? Maybe because people are on stream may end up tailing this lineup, go out there and enter it. That's why it might be duplicated for this contest, but it wouldn't be otherwise, right? So that sort of build where you can take all the chalk that you need to up top and differentiate down low is more than viable. Just to give you an idea of one that's a little bit less extreme, perhaps a lineup that you're taking two of those pieces of chalk up top, but maybe not as drastically different down low. Let's go ahead and take Sam Burns and Taylor Montgomery and maybe do this a little bit more thought-provoking. So let's take MJ Daffy this time, right? So MJ Daffy, he's not going to be like 1 or 2% owned. It's going to be a little bit more significant. So we have to make sure that we're being unique with our mid-tier options, right? Being a little bit more thoughtful about ownership there. Let's go ahead and take, this time, rather than Brandon Wu, we're going to go ahead and take Austin Eckroat, another relatively low-owned option towards the bottom of the 7K range. And here for our middle-tier options, we're going to take Brendan Todd, who's going to be like 2% owned at the very most. So rather than taking a pivot down there at the bottom, MJ Daffy, right, 7%, as opposed to like 2% owned Harry Hall, we're taking that pivot in the 7K range, which for somebody like Brendan Todd, he is going to be so significantly lower owned than everybody else in this range that you could argue that he's an even bigger pivot than Harry Hall, because down there with Harry Hall, right, there's a bunch of guys that are like 1-2% owned. But like Ryan Moore is like 0.5% owned. Brian Stewart's like 0.3% owned for the slate. Brendan Todd, you're actually getting a bunch of leverage in that range. So that's another way to get unique, still playing some of the chalk. Round it off here. You could play Gary Woodland again, whoever the heck you want to in that sort of lineup. That would be another way to get unique around some of the pieces of chalk that you may or may not like. Now going on to the single entry / 2 to 3 max build. In these sort of lineups, I don't think you have to think about ownership nearly as much. So again, just going with that core, right, to show you how you can navigate some of this chalk. If you wanted to take Sam Burns and Taylor Montgomery once again, right, just to hammer home this idea of the chalk is important, but it's not the end all be all. Down low, you don't have to be even nearly as unique, right? So if we wanted to go and take MJ Daffy, we wanted to take a piece of chalk here in the 7K range, you could do so too, right? So just to give you an idea, let's take Steven Yeager. He's going to get quite a bit of ownership here. Let's go ahead and take Alex Smalley, who again is going to be like 10% owned. And we're at $8,200. I don't know. Let's go ahead and try and actually spend up and take Molinax here. So I'm going to spend down from Yeager. Let's go to $7,100 rather than him. And a few guys that we could consider here, but I'm going to go ahead and put Patrick Rogers in. This sort of lineup for a large field GPP, probably wouldn't be unique because you do have two pieces of chalk. Even our value options are going to be like 7% owned. I mean, 15% for Molinax in the 8K range, probably like 5 to 7% on Daffy, 7 to 10% on Rogers and Alex Smalley. This is going to get duplicated, right? Like we couldn't enter this in the large field GPP. I wouldn't feel good about it being unique. Whereas in a single entry or 2 to 3 max, I'm fine entering this sort of lineup, right? I'm not nearly as worried about ownership. It's probably not going to be duplicated. And even if it was in those single entry sort of tournaments where it's not nearly as much of the prize pool to first place, it's not as much of a cardinal sin to go out there and actually duplicate yourself with the field. So that's my thoughts from the Draftkings lineup building perspective. What I'll do now is I'll catch up on chat before we hop into prize picks. And I'll remind you, we are going to talk about our favorite prize picks props. So let's see what we've got. Where are we at? Alrighty, here we go. So Antonio says, Callum Turan, I think he's a stud. Yes, I love Callum Turan. I'll be there too. CJ says, Adam Long has been struggling lately, but he was decent earlier last season. Yeah, that's the thought process, right? He's going to be low owned. He's low priced because of that. So it's definitely a buy low spot for him. I'm going to be there too. Myron says, thoughts on Dean Burmeister? I like him. DP World Tour standout. He's a top 50 player over there on that tour. That's why he got his tour card this season through that program. Much better player than his price tag indicates, but on the DP World Tour, I will have to say, Myron, he hasn't looked that good of late. He missed the cut over there about 2-3 weeks ago when I was doing a lot of analysis for that tour. So that kind of puts a bad taste in the back of my mouth, but he's still a much better player than the price tag indicates. So I think you're onto something there. Tyler says, let's get the bag, boys. Absolutely. Let's definitely get that bag. And Eric says, Griot or Benny Ann. So I'm okay with Benny Ann. I think he's a decent play. I'm not a huge fan of Griot. So I talked him up as a fade this week. The issue with Griot is that he's lost on approach, or at least he's gained less than half a stroke on approach in his last 4 events, which if you know anything about Emiliano Griot, that's not going to fly, right? He's one of the best approach players on tour, and he's gained all of it with the flat stick. So some people might say that that's a good sign of things to come. I think it's a horrible sign of things to come. So I'll just, I'm probably going to have to fade him there. Let's go over to prize picks now and I'll talk through this board. So I did a whole preview on prize picks, but just to point out like 3 or 4 props that I'm really getting to here. A lot of them are strokes props. And frankly, because the PM wave, I think is going to play easier than the morning. Taking Sam Burns understrokes makes a lot of sense. The average last year was 69.87 strokes. Sam Burns gains 2 strokes or more to the field. So this is a stat that's been calculated, by the way, 46% of the time. He gains more than 1 stroke to the field 86% of the time. Okay, so if the scoring average is going to be 69.87, right? And if he gains at least 1 stroke to the field, it's at least, right? It's not exactly 1, it's at least 1 stroke to the field 86% of the time. That means he's going to shoot 69 or lower. What, 86% plus of the time, if not better than that? You're giving me an 86% prop here? Are you kidding me? I have to take that, right? And the more and more I look at this, the more and more I like the Sam Burns prop. So I love that there. Moving to a few other PM props, I like the under on Russell Henley there a whole hell of a lot. So hit the Gala at 70.5. Again, the average was 69.87, right? So hit the Gala, much better than average player for this field, playing in the PM wave, which we think is going to be advantageous for day one. I have to take the under there too. And in terms of stances against players, I guess it would be like the under on Griot's irons here. I mean, he has been horrible with the irons for a few weeks, right? So I'd take the under at 13.5. He's being priced like his long-term sample size. And even JT Poston at 13 greens. I'm taking the under here too. And now he's in the morning, which is actually the worst of the 2 conditions. So that's why we're also fading him there. I know Griot's in the quote-unquote advantageous conditions there in the PM, but he's just way projected too high. Poston's a wild card, right? He's going to miss a bunch of greens. He'll still shoot 3 or 4 under par, only hitting 8 or 9 greens on a day. In fact, I remember at the tournament he won over there at the John Deere Classic, he hit like 10 greens on a day and shot -8. You're just not going to see that from very many players. A lot of those were putts from the fringe, etc., because he's not the most accurate player, but he's a great putter. So yeah, JT Poston misses at least 5 greens to push there, 6 or more to end up hitting. That's definitely a prop I like there too. But that is all I've got for the live stream. I'm going to check on chat on my phone once again to see if there's any questions. But if not, gonna hop on out of here. I have no idea what's going on with the chat down there. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any questions. Maybe my phone's lagging. I have no way of telling, boys. I, again, apologize for the chat dying on us out there, but hopefully you got all the information that you were looking for. I look forward to doing this every week, and we're going to do it for all of golf season, whether it's the swing season, back in the heat of things come next year when we have the Honda Classic, all the major championships. We're going to have you completely covered. And that does include Showdown this weekend. We're going to have Showdown live streams for rounds 2 through 4. So tomorrow night, sometime after the round ends, probably after Thursday night football too, we're going to go live, talk through the slate for Friday, do the same thing for Saturday and Sunday slate. So make sure to look forward to that. If you haven't already smashed that like button, make sure you go ahead and do so too. And make sure you are subscribed to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss any of that content when it drops.